Since Saturday morning, 59 earthquakes have struck the same stretch of the San Andreas Fault running beneath Pinnacles National Park in central California. 59 in 5 days. The largest has run at roughly M4 territory, which means these are felt events, not catastrophic, not wall cracking, but noticeable. The kind that sends people in the Hollister and Salinas Valley area reaching for their phones to check the USGS app. The kind that reminds the people who live along the central California coast that the ground under them is not fixed. I want to talk about why I am watching this swarm differently from the way I watch most swarms, because most swarms in California are background noise. The state is seismically active, things rattle constantly, and individual swarm episodes without specific context are not necessarily newsworthy. But this one is at Pinnacles, and Pinnacles is on a specific section of the San Andreas Fault that has a specific and documented history that makes 5 consecutive days of activity here carry a different weight than 5 days of activity almost anywhere else on the fault. Let me take you through that history, because if you do not know the Parkfield story, you are missing the most important context for understanding why this swarm matters. Parkfield is a small community of roughly 20 people in Monterey County, California, on the San Andreas Fault midway between Los Angeles and San Francisco. The town has a population that fluctuates depending on whether the earthquake scientists are in town. And earthquake scientists have been in this town regularly and obsessively for 4 decades, because Parkfield sits on a section of the San Andreas Fault that has produced a major earthquake, specifically a magnitude 6 earthquake, at an interval so regular that in the 1980s, the United States Geological Survey believed it had found the holy grail of seismology, a predictable earthquake. The Parkfield earthquake produced a documented sequence of approximately M6 events in 1857, 1881, 1901, 1922, 1934, and 1966. The intervals between those events were 24, 20, 21, 12, and 32 years, averaging roughly 22 years. 6 events, 6 intervals, averaging to a number that seemed regular enough to support prediction. In 1985, the USGS published a formal earthquake prediction for Parkfield, a magnitude 6. Earthquake was expected to occur on the Parkfield section of the San Andreas Fault between 1987 and 1993, with a 95% confidence level. This was not speculation. It was the USGS, the authoritative federal earth science agency, issuing a formal predictive statement based on the best available science and the most complete seismic record they had for any fault in the world. They deployed one of the densest arrays of seismometers, strain meters, creep meters, and ground deformation monitors ever assembled on a fault segment, specifically to record the predicted earthquake and every precursor that led up to it. The monitoring network at Parkfield in the late 1980s and 1990s was the state-of-the-art for earthquake science. The earthquake did not arrive in 1987. It did not arrive in 1988 or 1989 or 1990 or 1991 or 1992 or 1993. It did not arrive in 1994, when Northridge shook Los Angeles but left Parkfield quiet. It did not arrive in 1999 or 2000 or 2001 or 2002 or 2003. It arrived on September 28, 2004, 17 years after the center of the USGS's 95% confidence window, and 38 years after the previous 1966 event. The 2004 Parkfield earthquake was magnitude 6, 0, exactly as predicted in terms of its character. It was precisely the kind of earthquake the USGS had said would happen at Parkfield. It was also 38 years into a predicted 22-year cycle. Every precursor signal that was supposed to precede it by hours or days was absent. The earthquake arrived without any of the anticipated warning signs and 17 years out of predicted position. The 2004 Parkfield earthquake did not disprove earthquake science. It demonstrated something important and humbling, that even the best monitored fault segment in the world, with the most regular historical earthquake record ever documented for a single location, can fail to produce its earthquake on schedule by a factor of nearly 2. The earthquake arrived eventually. The fault is going to keep producing earthquakes. The predictability that seemed so compelling in 1985 was a statistical artifact of a small data set, 6 data points, that, when extended to a 7th event, revealed the underlying process to be considerably more variable than the first 6 suggested. The Parkfield prediction experiment is now discussed in seismology textbooks as a defining case study in both the potential and the limits of earthquake prediction science. I'm telling you all of this because it is the essential context for the swarm that has been running for 5 days beneath Pinnacles National Park. Pinnacles sits roughly 40 miles north of Parkfield on the same central section of the San Andreas. The Parkfield segment and the Pinnacles section share the same distinctive character. This is the transition zone between the creeping and locked sections of the San Andreas Fault, and that transition zone is the specific location that makes persistent swarm activity here different from swarm activity elsewhere on the fault. The San Andreas Fault does not behave uniformly along its length. The northern section, from the San Francisco Bay Area northward through the Russian River Valley to the Mendocino Triple Junction, creeps. It slides continuously and aseismically, with the two sides of the fault moving past each other at a slow, steady rate without storing elastic strain for sudden release. The creeping section does not produce large earthquakes because the fault is moving too continuously to build the accumulated stress that a major earthquake requires. The southern section, from the Salton Sea northward through the Inland Empire to the Cajun Pass area where I covered the June 2026 earthquake gate study, is locked. It is not moving. The Pacific and North American plates are stuck to each other along that segment, building stress with every passing year. That stress will eventually release in a large earthquake. The 1857 Fort Tejon earthquake ruptured the southern section, and the next major southern section earthquake is a matter of when, not if. The Parkfield Pinnacles corridor is where the fault transitions between these two behaviors, from the creeping north to the locked south. The transition zone is one of the most geologically and seismologically active parts of the entire fault, not because it is about to rupture catastrophically, but because the competing behaviors of creep and locking on adjacent sections create a concentration of stress at the boundary between them. Earthquakes at Pinnacles and Parkfield are generated by this boundary condition. The mechanical response of the fault to the stress accumulated at the transition between zones of different behavior. 5 days of sustained swarm activity at this transition zone tells me something specific about the current state of the fault system at this location. It tells me that the fault is responding to accumulated stress in a distributed way, releasing it in dozens of small events rather than accumulating it silently and releasing it in a single large one. The question that seismologists ask during any swarm, the question they are asking right now about the Pinnacles swarm, is whether the swarm represents a final release event that reduces the stress in this part of the system, or whether it represents a nucleation phase, a preparation period for a larger event on the same or adjacent section of the fault. There is no definitive answer to that question in real time. The USGS's probabilistic framework for swarms is honest about this. Elevated swarm. Activity temporarily elevates the probability of a subsequent larger earthquake on the section of fault where the swarm is occurring. Not dramatically, not to the level of certainty, but measurably. During an active swarm at Parkfield or Pinnacles, the background probability of a Parkfield type M6 earthquake on the central San Andreas is elevated above its baseline. The baseline probability is not zero even without the swarm. There is another Parkfield type M6 in the fault's future. As certain as the fact that the plate motion does not stop. The swarm elevates the probability in the near-term window. How much depends on the swarm's specifics, its magnitude distribution, its spatial pattern, its duration, and whether it shows signs of organizing around, a main shock or simply decaying. The specific pattern I am watching in the Pinnacles swarm is the daily event count and the magnitude distribution. A swarm that is slowly decaying, producing fewer events each day and showing no events above M3, is typically a swarm that is releasing stored stress in small increments and organizing toward quiet. A swarm that maintains its activity level or accelerates, or that produces an event above M4 that could be a foreshock to a larger main shock, is a swarm that warrants escalating concern. The current pattern, with 59 events in 5 days and the largest in the M4 range, is consistent with the early to middle phase of a typical Parkfield area swarm. It has not yet shown the decay that would indicate it is resolving. The specific geographic stakes of a potential larger earthquake on the central San Andreas, the Parkfield to Pinnacles section, are different from the stakes of a southern San Andreas event, and I want to be specific about that. The shakeout scenario that USGS modeled for AM7, 8 southern San Andreas earthquake projects, roughly 800 deaths and 50,000 injuries concentrated in the Los Angeles basin. A Parkfield type M6 to M7 event on the central section, by contrast, would primarily affect the smaller communities of the central California coast ranges, Parkfield itself, Coalinga, Paso Robles, King City, Hollister, and the agricultural communities of the Salinas and San Joaquin valleys. These communities are significantly less densely populated than the Los Angeles metropolitan area, which means a comparable magnitude earthquake at Parkfield produces a dramatically smaller human toll than a comparable earthquake at the southern San Andreas. The difference matters for understanding the stakes of what I am watching at Pinnacles, and I want to be honest about it. The Pinnacles swarm is not a direct precursor to the Los Angeles catastrophe that features in most dramatic earthquake coverage. It is a signal from the central fault section about the current mechanical state of the transition zone. The stakes are real for the central California communities within the shaking radius of a Parkfield-type major earthquake, a Hollister or Coalinga earthquake at M6. 5 or M7 would cause serious structural damage and potentially deaths in an area with significant older masonry construction. Paso Robles, which was affected by the 2003 San Simeon M6. 5 earthquake that killed 2 people in collapsing buildings and damaged significant downtown structures is within the relevant hazard zone. The human stakes are not Los Angeles, but they are real, and they belong to real communities with real vulnerability. The one thing I want to say specifically about the current Parkfield Pinnacles swarm that connects it to the bigger picture is the Parkfield prediction experiment's ongoing legacy. After the 2004 earthquake arrived 17 years late, and without the precursors, the monitoring network was designed to detect the seismological. Community made a significant investment in a different approach to understanding the fault. Instead of trying to predict earthquakes by watching for surface signals, they would watch the fault from inside. The San Andreas Fault Observatory at Depth, SAFOD, is a borehole drilled directly into the Parkfield section of the San Andreas Fault to a depth of approximately 2 kilometers, penetrating the active fault zone itself and deploying instruments directly within the fault gouge. The SAFOD borehole has been producing data on the fault's mechanical behavior from inside since the mid-2000s, and the data it has generated about the structure of the fault zone, the chemistry of the fault materials, and the deformation behavior of the fault at depth is among the most valuable earthquake research data produced anywhere in the world. The 5-day swarm at Pinnacles, 40 miles from the SAFOD site, is being recorded by the monitoring network that the Parkfield prediction experiment built, and that has been continuously operating since the 1980s. Every one of the 59 earthquakes in this swarm has been recorded at higher resolution than essentially any other location on the San Andreas Fault. The swarm is happening in the most watched part of one of the most watched faults on Earth. The scientists who are monitoring it have more data, more context, and more analytical tools than any prior generation of earthquake researchers watching any prior swarm at this location. Their assessment of what the swarm means will be specific and well-grounded, and I will be bringing you their public statements as they emerge. What I need from you right now is specific preparation. If you live in the Hollister, Salinas, King City, Paso Robles, or Coalinga corridor, in the communities that would feel a M6 to M7 Parkfield or Pinnacles earthquake most strongly, review your specific earthquake preparedness today. The Parkfield fault has produced exactly the kind of earthquake this swarm could precede every generation. The 2004 earthquake arrived. Another one will arrive. Whether it arrives tomorrow or in another decade is the question the swarm is not answering. But the preparation that would reduce your risk is the same regardless of timing. Know whether your building was constructed before 1990 in an unreinforced masonry or tilt-up construction style. Both categories are significantly more vulnerable than post-2000 construction in a Parkfield-type earthquake. Secure heavy shelving, water heaters, and overhead objects that can become projectiles. Have your 72-hour emergency kit ready. Know that Shake Alert will give you a warning before the shaking arrives. Make sure your phone is set to receive emergency alerts. 59 earthquakes in 5 days at the world's most monitored earthquake fault. The last time the Parkfield segment produced something bigger, nobody predicted it correctly. I'm watching this daily. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.